For most of automotive history, sound was an afterthought. A single paper cone speaker in the middle of the dashboard, an AM radio, and whatever the local station decided to broadcast, that was in-car audio, and for decades nobody expected anything more. But every so often, a car maker decided that the sound system deserved the same engineering attention as the engine or the suspension. This video is about those moments. Not aftermarket head units, not custom subwoofer installations, factory systems, designed into the car before it ever left the assembly line. 7 systems, spanning 70 years. Among them, a record player mounted under a dashboard, the first hi-fi brand ever to appear on a car's option list, and a 1.5 kilowatt system with speakers that rise out of the doors and light up. Together, they tell the story of how the car became, for many people, the best listening room they own. In the mid-1950s, an American driver had exactly one source of in-car entertainment: the radio. What played was decided by a programming director, not by the person behind the wheel. Chrysler was the first company to offer an alternative, and it did so with vinyl. The system was called Highway Hi-Fi, and it was developed by Peter Goldmark, head of CBS Laboratories. Goldmark understood that a standard record could never survive a moving car, so he designed a new format around the problem. A 7-inch disc spinning at just 16 2/3 revolutions per minute, with ultrafine grooves. The slow speed and dense grooves allowed around 45 minutes of playback per side, at the cost of limited treble response. The player sat under the dashboard on a sprung, cushioned mounting, with a tone arm that pressed into the groove harder than any home player would dare, and it fed its signal through the car radio's own amplifier and speaker. Goldmark installed a prototype in his own Chrysler and demonstrated it on the company's proving ground: cobblestones, potholes, emergency stops. The record did not skip. Chrysler was convinced, ordered roughly 18,000 units, and offered Highway Hi-Fi across its brands for the 1956 model year as a $200 option. Serious money at the time, around 10% of the price of a cheaper model in the range. Then reality arrived. The special discs were pressed exclusively by Columbia, and only 42 titles were ever offered: light classics, show tunes, easy listening. No rock and roll, which was precisely what the radio was full of. The heavy tracking force wore the records out quickly, and in cheaper Dodges and Plymouths, with firmer suspensions than the executive cars Goldmark had tuned the system in, the record skipped after all. Warranty claims piled up. Chrysler sold around 3,500 players in 1956, fewer than 700 the following year, and quietly withdrew support before the decade was out. A later RCA-built changer that played standard 45s lasted only from 1960 to 1961. Highway Hi-Fi failed, but it established an idea the industry never let go of: the driver, not the broadcaster, should choose the music. Through the 60s and 70s, factory audio improved slowly. Stereo FM arrived, then 8-track, then cassette. But anyone who cared about sound quality did the same thing: pulled the factory radio out and installed something better. Factory audio meant baseline audio, until General Motors and Bose changed the definition. The story began in 1979, when Amar Bose himself approached Delco Electronics, GM's in-house electronics division. The collaboration reportedly started with a handshake and consumed around $12 million in development before a formal contract was even signed. The premise was radical for its time. Instead of dropping generic speakers into pre-cut holes at the end of the assembly process, Bose would engineer a complete system for each specific car: speaker positions, enclosures, and equalization matched to the acoustics of that exact interior. Each speaker was driven by its own amplifier, tuned for its own location in the cabin. The result appeared in 1983 in 4 GM flagships: the Cadillac Seville and Eldorado, the Buick Riviera, and the Oldsmobile Toronado. It is generally recognized as the industry's first factory-installed premium sound system. The option cost $895, more than most complete aftermarket setups, and nobody at GM knew whether customers would pay it. They did. Nearly a quarter of Seville and Eldorado buyers ticked the box in the first year. And when the option reached the Corvette for 1984, the take rate was over 80%. The message to the entire industry was unmistakable. Buyers would pay a premium for a respected audio brand on the door panel, and a factory system designed into the car could outperform equipment bolted in afterwards. Every branded factory system that followed, every Harman Kardon, every Bang & Olufsen, every Burmester badge, stands on the foundation that Delco and Bose laid in 1983. 1989 was a remarkable year for Japanese cars and sound. It was the year Mazda launched the MX-5, a small roadster that solved the problem of listening with the roof down by placing speakers directly in the seat headrests. And it was the year Toyota unveiled the first Lexus. The LS400 was engineered to beat Mercedes-Benz and BMW at their own game, and its audio option made a statement of intent. The premium system carried the name Nakamichi. For anyone who knew hi-fi, that name needed no explanation. Nakamichi was the maker of the Dragon, arguably the finest cassette deck ever built, a company whose reputation for obsessive engineering was almost mythical. Putting that name inside a car, as factory equipment, told buyers precisely what kind of company Lexus intended to keep. Owners of early LS400s still speak of the Nakamichi system with reverence, and it did something larger than sounding good. It established the modern template in which a luxury car brand pairs with a genuine high-end audio house, not merely a mass-market electronic supplier. Lexus extended the idea in 2001, when the new LS430 introduced the first Mark Levinson automotive system, a name drawn from American high-end amplification, by then owned by the Harman Group. Thousands of hours of engineering went into tuning it for the cabin, and the partnership became exclusive. To this day, Mark Levinson systems appear only in Lexus vehicles. Enthusiasts have debated ever since how much of the original companies lives on in these badged systems, a fair question that applies across the industry. But the tuning work is real, and the LS430 system set a standard the segment spent years chasing. The next milestone came not from a $100,000 flagship, but from a mid-size sports sedan, and it came as standard equipment. For the 2004 model year, Acura equipped the third-generation TL with a system developed together with Panasonic and Elliott Shiner, a Grammy-winning recording engineer whose credits include Steely Dan, the Eagles, and Fleetwood Mac. The system carried his studio moniker, ELS Surround. Shiner had spent years arguing that the car was the ideal place for surround sound. Unlike a living room, a car has fixed seating positions, so a system can be tuned around exactly where every listener's ears will be. The TL was the first production car to offer DVD audio playback, a 6-disc in-dash changer reading high-resolution multi-channel discs at 24-bit, 96 kHz, reproduced through 8 speakers and a 225-watt amplifier in 5.1 discrete channels. For a brief moment, a $33,000 sedan offered a listening experience closer to a mixing studio than most home systems of the day, and, in a charming detail of the transition era, the same head unit still included a cassette slot. DVD audio itself lost the format war, and the disc drives eventually disappeared from Acura's lineup. But the ELS partnership survived the format that launched it and continues across Acura's range today. The 2004 TL remains a landmark for a different reason as well. It proved that reference-grade factory sound did not have to be a luxury-class option. It could simply come with the car. If the Acura made high-end factory audio democratic, Audi and Bang & Olufsen made it theatrical. The Danish company entered the automotive world in 2005 with the advanced sound system for the Audi A8 and S8, with cars reaching customers in 2006. The specification was serious: 14 active loudspeakers, each with its own amplification channel, driven by Bang & Olufsen's ICE-powered digital amplifier technology with a combined output of more than 1,000 watts, an unprecedented figure for a factory system at the time. Every speaker sat in its own sealed aluminium enclosure, isolated from the body of the car to keep resonance out of the sound. But what everyone remembers is the moment the system switches on. 2 tweeters rise slowly out of the dashboard, each crowned with Bang & Olufsen's acoustic lens, a sculpted element that spreads high frequencies evenly across the cabin so that every seat hears the same detailed treble. It was engineering, but it was also performance. The option cost around €6,000 in Germany, and buyers were paying not only for sound, but for a piece of visible, moving industrial design. That instinct, the sound system as an object to be seen, not just heard, reshaped the premium interior. The partnership between Audi and Bang & Olufsen continues today, and in the current A8 the system has grown to 23 loudspeakers and 1,920 watts, with additional speakers in the roof lining creating a third, vertical dimension of sound. The motorized lenses still rise from the dashboard, 2 decades on. Burmester Audio System was founded in Berlin in 1977 by Dieter Burmester, a musician and engineer whose amplifiers became some of the most respected and expensive in European high-end audio. The company entered the automotive world in 2009, first in the Porsche Panamera, with a Mercedes-Benz partnership beginning the same year. Its defining statement arrived in 2013, in the W222 generation of the S-Class. The Burmester high-end 3D surround sound system used 24 loudspeakers driven by 24 amplifier channels with a total output of 1,540 watts, combining analog amplification for finesse in the mid-range and treble with digital amplification for dynamic reserves. Speakers mounted in the roof added height to the soundstage, the third dimension in the system's name, and a subwoofer occupied part of the boot. The showmanship matched the engineering. The tweeters in the front doors rotate out of their housings when the car starts, ringed with light, and the speaker grills are engraved metalwork. A function called the VIP seat uses signal processing to focus the entire system's performance on any single chosen seat, an honest acknowledgement of who this car is really built for. The option cost over $6,000, on top of a car that already carried a formidable price, and reviewers described it as one of the finest listening environments ever offered on 4 wheels. With the S-Class, the pattern begun by Bose and GM 30 years earlier reached its logical destination, the German high-end, once the preserve of dedicated listening rooms, installed on a production line. The final system in this story pairs 2 American icons. McIntosh Laboratory has built amplifiers in Binghamton, New York since 1949, hand-assembled machines with glowing blue power meters, the amplifiers that powered the sound system at Woodstock in 1969. The company had touched the automotive world before. Its first factory-installed system appeared in the Subaru Legacy in the 1990s, followed by projects with Harley-Davidson and the 100th anniversary Ford GT in the early 2000s. Then, for nearly 2 decades, McIntosh stayed out of cars entirely. The return came in 2022, in the revived Jeep Grand Wagoneer. The MX-1375 reference entertainment system uses 23 loudspeakers in 16 locations, a 12-inch dual voice coil subwoofer, and a 24-channel amplifier producing up to 1,375 watts, protected by the same PowerGuard anti-distortion technology found in the company's home amplifiers. An adaptive 3D processing system analyses the incoming music and applies spatial effect only where the recording calls for it. And McIntosh made sure the experience looked the part. The touchscreen displays the famous blue watt meters, dancing with the music exactly as they have on home amplifiers for 70 years, surrounded by illuminated logos and machined metal trim. To develop the system, McIntosh engineers built a listening room next to the Wagoneer development facility and worked until the car began to take on the character of the reference room itself. A hand-built amplifier company from upstate New York, inside a full-size family SUV, it is an unlikely pairing on paper and a perfectly logical one in practice. More people will hear a McIntosh in a Grand Wagoneer than will ever stand in front of one in a dealer's showroom. From a record player fighting the cobblestones of a Detroit test track to a McIntosh reference system in a family SUV, factory car audio grew from a novelty option into a discipline of its own. Today, far more people experience the great names of hi-fi through a car door panel than through loudspeakers in a living room. Which factory system do you remember best? Share it in the comments, and if the history of audio brands is your kind of story, you know where the subscribe button is. Thank you for watching.